Hey there, it's Tom Ryan, founder and executive chairman of ICR. Before we get into the next episode, I wanted to ask that you subscribe to the show. It'll help us get even more unique and interesting guests on the podcast, and in turn, continue to educate management teams and the growing ecosystem that creates value for fast-growing private and public companies. And while you're at it, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Very much appreciated.
You see this increased demand for low carbon or zero emission energy from the data centers in particular.
For all the recent negative news surrounding renewable energy in the U.S., the reality is that in 2025, around 80% of the new power generation that came online globally was renewable. But to encourage global players to participate in that market for renewables, you need a rigorous system of verification and a stable, modern marketplace. That's where today's company comes in.
It helps generate price transparency, trust, and confidence in these markets to enable more and more low or zero emission generation to come online.
My name is Tom Ryan, and this is Welcome to the Arena, the ICR podcast. Each week, I sit down with today's business leaders to give you an inside scoop on some of America's most prosperous public companies, their origins, their challenges, and the keys to their success. Our guest today is John Melby, the CEO of Xpansiv, the world's largest registry platform for renewable energy and carbon. John is a widely recognized and accomplished leader in energy and environmental markets with over 2 decades of experience driving innovation in renewable carbon, natural gas, and power markets. John guided the creation of Xpansiv and has launched new products for power, carbon, demand response, energy efficiency, and the transmission of capacity markets. Prior to forming Xpansiv, John held various roles where he advised governments, energy companies, financial institutions, and exchanges on energy and environmental issues, which makes him the perfect person to speak on the current state of power generation and the market for renewables. Let's enter the arena with John Melby. You know, you have 30 years in the energy markets from early deregulation days in DC to today. Maybe tell us about your career leading up to Xpansiv and some of the cool things that you've done.
I started in, as you mentioned, in Washington, D.C., working on a number of political issues, but one of them was energy deregulation. So I worked on the legislation or the rules that changed to open up markets for both electricity and natural gas in the 90s. And then I went to work for the first electronic marketplace for electricity in North America, which is actually the second one in the world. So I went out and worked there and then moved on to a company that I ended up being president and then CEO of called APX, which is part of Xpansiv's story now. That business was set up to build registries for renewables. We built the first renewable energy credit registry in the world and then built out for carbon and a number of other asset classes. And then I went on to work with a number of the large exchange operators that provided derivative solutions around energy and environmental markets and helped set up a market that was designed to support the developing environmental markets. So it's an energy and environmental market called the Green Exchange that was acquired by CME Group a few years back.
Yep.
And then ended up on a couple of boards. And one of the boards that I was on was a startup company in Silicon Valley called Xpansiv 1.0, and then a spot exchange based in Australia called CBL. So in the summer of 2019, we brought those two companies together and I came in an operating role.
What gap was there in the marketplace that you felt Xpansiv kind of saw and filled at the time?
Yeah, so what we saw and still see is that the world was starting to care about how things were produced and how they're used. So in particular in energy, you can think about a megawatt of power is produced. People care if it came from a coal plant, a natural gas plant, a nuclear plant, or renewable, whatever it may be.
Yep.
And how do you track that? And then how do you transact that? So Xpansiv was really founded, as I said, about a decade ago with the idea of modernizing the environmental markets, but also providing infrastructure that looks familiar to commodity markets around the world. And that would, in our view, enable capital to be deployed. So you think about large-scale companies coming in and having the confidence to participate in these markets. They needed to have infrastructure that they understood and they could trust and could go through their internal processes. So we set out to build that market infrastructure that would support the changing in energy and environmental markets, but also look very familiar to those marketplaces. So for us, that really meant initially that we would build an online trading platform and a next generation registry. And that's evolved for us. So today, Xpansiv operates registries, exchanges, and provides data and transaction services across over 90 countries.
You know, when you go to your website, Xpansiv does a lot of things for sure. How does it kind of all fit together?
Yeah, so we've worked very hard to bring it together as one platform so that customers can come in and then we can meet them wherever they are in the process. So at the starting point often is a registry. It looks like the depository trust corporation does to equities. So when someone trades a share of, say, Morgan Stanley stock, that stock goes through and sits in a registry. That registry then has an account and it moves around. People don't actually take delivery of the stock certificates.
Right.
In the same way, in these environmental markets, you have to have a single system of truth where you know what has happened. And that underlying registry is the first point. But then there's also the need for transactions. So how do you see price discovery? So we operate the world's largest spot exchange for both carbon and renewable energy credits. And then along the way, we built systems to help people interact with the grid. So if you have a battery that wants to connect to the grid or a solar panel, they require special systems, and we provide those types of systems to the market. And then we also provide additional over-the-counter services. So again, we can meet the customer where they are. So it could be auctions, it could be hand-holding, and the like. And so we're seeing this really come together, and it's coming across all the asset classes that we operate.
Yeah. I know you've said we're living through the most significant shift in the energy system since deregulation. What's driving that conviction? And maybe describe the magnitude of this transition over time. It's just absolutely gigantic.
From someone who's been in the energy markets for so many years, it's hard to wrap my brain around what's really happening.
Yeah.
The electricity demand in the US and most of the developed world has been flat for about 20 years, meaning that there's less electricity or very little electricity addition on the grid and then used by companies and people every day. And that's largely because of things like efficient light bulbs and better buildings and the like. And then what happened is we started to electrify more and more to decarbonize. So you can think of things like electric cars, which most people would see, but maybe even more impactful or off-road vehicles, things like forklifts and stuff like that were electrified.
Yep.
And that started increasing demand. But the real game changer was the data centers and AI and what's happening there. And so by some accounts, we're looking at 40% growth in demand in the next 20 years, or less than that, 15 years. And again, this is from a point where there was zero growth.
I mean, that's the bottleneck, right?
Yeah, it is the bottleneck. It's the true bottleneck for AI deploy. It's not even the chips anymore. It's really, where do you get enough power?
Yeah.
And it's electricity and natural gas. Both those areas are growing, but it's really electricity that's getting hit the most. So as we try to build out electricity across the grid, not just the US, it's all around the world, there are obviously a lot of options there. But for the most part, the near-term ability is through natural gas and combined cycle natural gas power plants, of which those will be built as fast as they can be built. But there's a capacity constraint in just buying turbines. At this point, it's about a 5-year wait to get a new turbine.
Wow.
So you think about the needs that the AI companies have and just the broader grid and the affordability of power for everyone. We're going to need to build faster than that. So what you're seeing is renewables be the main point of growth. And as those renewables come on the grid, it's obviously stuff that we support quite a lot. You also need batteries, and the batteries growth is something that's quite amazing to see happen. So by some projections, you see the supply of renewables coming on the grid will double by 2030. So in the next 6 years, so that's 4,600 gigawatts of power.
Yeah.
That's equivalent of 4,600 nuclear power plants coming on the grid.
Like you said, you can't wrap your head around it,
Yeah.
It's bananas.
It really is.
Why is the registry infrastructure so important and foundational to the transition?
Yeah, so the registry truly tracks what's happening, and then that enables different policies to be implemented. So you think about it from a government perspective, they may have incentives or requirements for more demand to be covered by renewables, and the system really tracks and becomes the system of truth.
Yep.
So really what the registry does is every megawatt of power that's created at the meter, you can think of the meter clicking one, it creates a certificate. And then when someone wants to use those, the certificates are unbundled from electricity. So the electricity is bought and sold the same way, and it competes directly with the fossil fuels. But then if somebody needs to meet their requirements, they can turn in those certificates, And those certificates then are used as that system of truth. Likewise, in programs like RE100, where companies around the world have committed to decarbonize, that's how they show that their progress is on there. So it creates transparency and trust in these marketplaces and provides a common understanding of what it means to reduce your emissions.
That's a great phrase, system of truth, because a lot of companies have net zero goals, and without a system of truth, your compliance risks losing credibility. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I can tell a story about how we built the first ones.
Yeah.
So going back into the late 90s, early 2000s, renewable energy, of course, existed, not at the scale it does today. And there were some companies that were forward-leaning and wanted to, for whatever reason, share with their customers that they were meeting their energy needs with renewables. So in the early days, for example, that would be Whole Foods.
Yep.
They would say that they were 100% renewable. And what they were doing is they were buying power from a generator, could be a wind farm somewhere, and that wind farm was attesting that power was going directly to that grocery store. And then obviously the question comes, how do you know that they're not attesting that same thing to 3 or 4 different people?
Right.
So we went in and built the first registries that track at the meter level and then create that certificate. And we worked with a couple NGOs and built the first system. And then that became the foundation of the first policies for what were called renewable portfolio standards. And it actually started in Texas. And Texas developed the first renewable portfolio standard. And we built the REC tracking system for that. And then basically started to put them all around the world or around North America and became the backbone of the U.S. policy for renewables.
Aside from kind of renewable energy certificates, I know you have a power business that works with producers in a lot of different ways. Maybe tell us about the power business, how it supports the transition, and how it kind of fits within the broader Xpansiv platform.
Yeah. So for your listeners here, you can think about a wind farm or any facility, a solar facility, geothermal, whatever it may be, that connects to the grid. They have to tell the grid operator what they're delivering into the grid. They bid into the market. There's a whole series of rules there to make sure that the systems operate in accordance to the engineering needs of the grid, but also market needs. So we provide infrastructure that enables them to connect. So that includes things like real-time services, 24-hour support. So when something happens where our desk can help them increase or decrease. And our position is very strong in that space. So we service about 16 gigawatts of power, of which about 6 gigawatts of that is Texas batteries. So if you think about all the batteries that connect to the wholesale grid in Texas, which is the largest state for that in the US, we're about 40% of the installed capacity. And that service, what it does is it enables those batteries to then be deployed when the prices go high or charged when the prices are low. We enable all that technology for it. So it's really become the backbone for the storage in the grid. Additionally, we acquired a company in 2021 called SREC Trade, and it's the largest independent solar rec aggregator in North America.
Yep.
So what that means is homeowner would have, for instance, a solar panel. Then that solar panel, they would produce a very small amounts of energy to meet their home and also get certificates that are valued. They're called SRECs. The large utilities are trying to buy in swaths of 10,000 at a time, and they're producing them at 1 or 2 at a time. So we aggregate that up using technology and support staff. And that has grown to be the largest aggregator of those types of services. So it enables homeowners to reduce their costs. And in fact, we have been able to provide meaningful monetization for those homeowners. And that business has grown since we acquired it at double-digit rates.
Wow. And I know another thing that you've done is kind of become what I would imagine is, an enabler of third-party solutions. You hooked up with Constellation, the largest producer of reliable emission-free energy in the U.S. Talk about how you work with Constellation and how they've been able to utilize your platform.
Yeah, so we work with them in a couple of ways. You see this increased demand for low carbon or zero emission energy from the data centers in particular. And Constellation is the largest provider of zero emission generation in the US. So what we do is we actually register that emission. So you need to have a third party. And in this case, we are the third party and operate a system that tracks and creates that, again, that system of truth in our registries. But then also through our platform, reach out to our customer base, which is almost all the wholesale energy market participants in the US and a lot of the large corporates that buy these types of services. And in the case, provided a marketplace and an auction and then continuous trading of that platform. So they could sell their certificates, and then the buyers of those certificates, those zero emission credits that Constellation's generation had produced, then can retire them so that they can use them for their marketing claims and other aspects, and then create that transparency and trust in that market. So it helps generate price transparency, trust, and confidence in these markets to enable more and more low or zero emission generation to come online.
Asia tends to get a bad rap when it comes to environmental issues, but Xpansiv recently teamed up with the Korea Exchange to launch a Korea carbon credit market, and Korea has generally set some really ambitious climate goals. So I asked John if he could address some of those misconceptions and explain the scope of the role that Asia is playing in the energy transition.
If you think about a timeline, maybe Europe was ahead of the US, and then the US started to catch up a bit. And then you really see Asia coming online and really being one of the largest areas of growth for environmental markets and making commitments. And we're very proud to be working in Korea and elsewhere around in Asia. You know, one of the things that I think is probably misunderstood by people is the amount of renewable and low carbon activity that is really already happening around the world, really, but in Asia in particular. We're actually not leading at this stage in the US.
Yeah. Interesting.
If you look at the renewable capacity, or how much of the electricity that was used last year and what was served by renewables globally, it was almost 30%. In the United States is somewhere around 25% of that. So there are other parts of the world ahead of us. And often, Korea is definitely a leader, but often China is a place that we point to when we look to, we're concerned about costs of renewables, things like that. They're at over 30% today. And nearly all new solar panels are being built there. It's really the place that's stepped up.
Yeah.
So I think one misconception is that others aren't doing things. They are.
Yep. In
some parts of the world, there's still just electrification. So, for instance, we also work in Africa with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And, there's a lot of people that don't have access to electricity. And it's not just clean electricity, it's just electricity, period.
Yeah.
And that's not just about having things like TVs and air conditioners. It's about having pumped water, just things that we take for granted. So what we're seeing, though, is those areas, it's cheaper to deploy renewables than it is to deploy fossil fuels in many cases. Not all, but in many cases. And as a result, globally last year, more than 80% of all the new generation that came online was renewable.
Wow.
So I think one of the misconceptions here in these markets is that it's something that it's going to happen in the future. And the reality is it's something that's happening today and has been happening. And renewables are on par in many cases, less expensive or at least easier to install on the grid than other forms of generation.
So you've acquired a number of companies, I know, in recent years, in addition to your partnerships with the Korea Exchange and Constellation. What's kind of the acquisition strategy? And I think you are doing a brand consolidation. What's the thought behind that?
Yes. So we very much see these markets as being global and that they needed to scale. And the problem that we're trying to help solve, the need to decarbonize, but also to provide energy to the world at prices that people can afford and energy security and all those types of things,
Yep.
that we really, truly needed to help those markets scale. And to do that, you needed to have a platform that had a number of pieces. So we brought those parts together. I mentioned before the Registry, which is where we start. And you only need one system of truth. You don't have multiples. So we wanted to build that out and be able to deploy technology across the globe that would service these markets. And similarly, we wanted to put together execution capabilities and meet the customers where they are. So that's really price discovery. How do they transact? Do they call someone to buy something, or do they trade real time? And these markets evolve. And so we wanted to provide that solution set. And then, as I mentioned before, for instance, with SREC Trade, we acquired a company that do aggregation so that it would enable things like rooftop solar to connect to the grid, but also increasingly batteries around the world. So we brought all these things together, but we didn't want to have a collection of companies.
Yeah.
We really wanted to come to the market as one. And so we've worked very, very hard to create a one Xpansiv experience. And customers can come to us and we can meet them where their needs are. They don't necessarily use all of our services, but they often use multiple parts of them. So it's to really bring it all together, and one of the key components for us was also geographic expansion. So we recently acquired a company called Evident that provides the underlying infrastructure for renewable energy credits for most of the developing world, so across Africa, Asia, Latin America. And so today, with that coupled with the registry infrastructure we have in North America, we register about 300 gigawatts of power, which is roughly 4% of the whole world's electricity goes through us, and we are the system of record for.
Wow.
It's not just about renewables. We see the same infrastructure being necessary for fuels. Recently did quite a lot with MIQ around methane. So it's methane. We do stuff around plastics. It's the same type of infrastructure, same customer base. So how do we build an infrastructure that takes away friction and makes it easier for these products to scale?
So it wouldn't be any kind of effective interview without asking you about AI and digitization and automation in general. Where do you see the biggest opportunities to apply all that stuff across like carbon and power and everything that you do?
At first, AI hits us, as we were talking about before, really the demand for electricity going up at astounding rates here. But then when you think about how do you deploy the technology to solve some of these systems, we don't build physical infrastructure. So there's lots of work that's being done around that. It's incredibly interesting about how do you decarbonize, for instance, existing fuels? How do you get more efficient across technologies? There's a lot of interesting work being done there. But what we do is we provide data that goes into that. So we are a primary source of data for a lot of these AI engines, and we see more and more of that work happening. We also are deploying AI to help improve transparency and trust and accelerate onboarding to platforms. So you can think about, for instance, a renewable facility. It could be in Indonesia that may be selling to a large data company that may be based in California, that they want to be assured what they're buying. So there's a lot of work that we do manually to track that, looking at satellite images, looking at line drawings, looking at legal documents, and AI can be deployed there to really accelerate that and make it a lot easier for it to work. We're also seeing AI being deployed in procurement models. So electricity and renewables and the attributes associated with them being coupled to the time of use. So we've done work with one of the largest technology companies in the world to help bring more real-time information. And all that's being driven or supported by AI and other improving technologies. For instance, we do work around tokenization and other aspects there as well.
Yeah, I wanted to also ask you, John, about what's happening currently in the U.S. There's been some negative headlines around renewable energy. I think the current administration has pulled back on solar and wind, but they, at the same time, the administration to me also seems to always stress energy independence, and we have a lot of energy here in the U.S. that we should utilize. What's your take on all that, and how does it affect Xpansiv?
Yeah, we operate around the world first. So we operate in a lot of different environments and different political systems that all change.
Yep.
So that's something that we spend a lot of time with. But here in the U.S., obviously there's a meaningful change in the administration's policies around renewables. But really, we don't see that impacting our business as directly. Most of the programs that operate that are required programs are at the state level. So if you have renewable portfolio standards, they'll be done at the individual state level around the country. And then corporates are making international commitments. They have to sell their products around the world, meet certain requirements, either for regulatory reasons or for whatever market reasons that they have. So they're still driving on that. And then the broader theme of needing energy. So, I couldn't think of anything stronger from an energy independence than renewables.
Yeah.
We're not importing from anywhere in the world. But just broadly, as we build out the next generation grid and really see it grow where it needs to meet the demands, it's going to be an all of the above strategy. So it's not just renewables.
Yep.
And, we support fuels and the decarbonization of those fuels. And we'll see more and more natural gas come online. But as I mentioned, it's a lot easier to develop renewables and get them sited and built. And then you'll see more and more batteries. So there's the environmental benefits that are driving it, but there's also just the reality of how do you get it in the ground. And so last year in the U.S., it was almost 90% of all new generation that came online in 2025 was renewable. And I think the number in 2026 will look similar.
Wow.
It's a very different market than it was 10 years ago. It's a lot cheaper to put renewables in. It's also often a lot faster.
You know, John, if you look out 5 years, what does success look like for Xpansiv? Is it scale, transparency, grid integration, interoperability? What does success look like, and where do you think you can make the biggest impact?
Success for us really will be to support the doubling of renewables that I mentioned by 2030.
Yep.
Everything that we do is to try to help facilitate those market development and help those markets scale. We develop our infrastructure to be open. So that means that even competitors to ours can utilize our infrastructure backbone to get that. So we really have leaned in heavily to that. So interoperability will be another success factor for us. So the global registry infrastructure we acquired, evident to connect into what we operate already and to be able to deploy the technology so it becomes ubiquitous across these markets. And then on the grid integration to really be the backbone of the renewables that are coming onto that grid, that large scale addition of new renewables that are come onto the grid and the battery that's associated with it. Because if you bring those renewables on, obviously there's intermittent issues. So you're going to need to bring those batteries on. So if we built out that backbone that enables the developers to deploy faster and at a better cost, then that would be success.
That was John Melby, CEO of Xpansiv, which operates the world's largest integrated, open, and neutral market infrastructure for the global energy transition. And while many people focus on the mechanics of registries or the newness of trading environmental commodities, I think they miss the big picture, which is this. Without a trusted infrastructure, the energy transition cannot scale. And John and his team are making progress there every day, essentially building the scaffolding that's going to make it all happen. And that's an exciting thing, not just for them, but for the whole world. I'm Tom Ryan. We'll see you next time back in the arena.
References to specific stocks are not intended to be recommendations for specific trading behavior. Comments presented on this podcast are intended for informational and educational purposes only, and do not represent opinions or recommendations on whether to buy, sell, or hold shares of a particular stock. All investors are advised to conduct their own independent research into individual stocks before making a trading decision. In addition, investors are advised that past stock performance is no guarantee of future price performance.